Hola y bienvenidos al podcast Un gato en tierra de perros, vuestra referencia para la política estadounidense, la cultura y mucho más.
Hello, this is Joe Magaha. Thank you, friends, for being with me for another episode of Un Gato en Tierra de Perros. Today, I have with me again a friend of the show, Kelley Vlahos. Welcome, Kelley.
Thanks for having me again, Joe. It's great to be here.
Well, thank you. There's so much going on. It's been kind of a whirlwind. Every day there are new reports of what's going on with the government, with Doge, and it seems like also the Ukraine war is hopefully they're pushing to wind it down. Pete Hegseth made an announcement or came out today and said some stuff that really upset the Europeans, but that was to be expected, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it does seem, as my boss at the Quincy Institute had said, Trita Parsi, that all of the things that Biden seemed reluctant to do, which he means go out there, say you want to get this thing over, you want to end the war, you want to bring everyone to the table. This is not going to be won on the battlefield, and we're going to start using our own leverage to do it. Trump is out there, JD Vance is out there, Pete Hegseth are out there. They're saying all the things that for some reason Biden just couldn't bring himself to convey for whatever reason for the last 3 years. Things seem to be moving at a clip that I can't even keep up with as a news editor. But they've laid down the gauntlet, so to speak. Now, you may not agree with their tactics. You might not even agree. I think we agree that the Ukraine war needs to end in a conference room or in a diplomatic space rather than the battlefield. You may not agree that the United States should be talking directly with Russia, which Trump has advocated for. But geez, I mean, at least he's doing something.
Yes, and I may be misinterpreting this, but I think I read that he's reaching out to Russia and China about all three of us cutting our military budget in half, which I think
Yes.
is wonderful. Yeah.
I mean, okay, is it really going to happen? Well, we don't know about that. We have a lot of mixed messages coming out of Washington right now. But that said, when's the last time you heard an American president say, yeah, we got to cut the budget and let's do it together with the axis of, quote, evil. We can all kumbaya, cut our budgets. And I believe that he advocated for getting together with Russia and China to restart nuclear talks on reducing the nuclear arsenal. When's the last time you heard a president say that? Now, will it happen? We don't know. But he's saying a lot of things that I'm sorry, I can't disagree with. Obviously, the proof is in the pudding. We watched an entire first Trump administration where there were a lot of promises for restraint that didn't exactly turn out the way we had hoped. But on the other hand, he shakes things up and he says things that I think people on the center left can't say, or if they say it, that they're accused of being weak on terror, weak on Russia, weak on China, soft on this and the other thing. He's coming out with this peace through strength, and whatever your audience might think about that rhetoric, it gets people thinking, and it also gives cover to a lot of people on the right side of the dial to advocate for ending war, for advocating for peace, which has always been more of a left coded mission or set of statements and approaches to foreign policy.
Yeah, and it kind of the past I guess 10 years or so have kind of thrown me off, because I was raised in suburban town, college town, Claremont, California, which is very Democrat, always has been. And when I was a kid, everybody was against the war, against the Vietnam War. And, people had signs in their windows that said war is not healthy for children and other living things. Yes, something like that. It was very much a thing of the left. And now, you talk to people and you say, well, I think this Ukraine war needs to end, and it's not going to, they're going to have to be concessions on both sides. And they say, oh, so you're for Putin and you're a Putin apologist, and it's, well, what are we talking about here? Are we in 1952? Are we in the Cold War?
Yeah, everything's been flipped.
Yeah.
And I understand it as somebody who has been reporting in Washington for going on 25 years, that politics drives everything in this town. And also a lot of old Cold War thinking drives a lot of the conversation here. And so there are a lot of people in Washington on both the left and right who do not like Russia, that have always seen Russia as a threat, but always believe that we should be bolstering NATO to confront the Russia challenge. And they don't acknowledge that a lot of that thinking, a lot of the moves that we've made in terms of NATO expansion, the buildup of European weapons and putting nuclear weapons in Europe, have all sort of conspired to create the situation we are in today. They will not admit that at all. And so when somebody like the Quincy Institute or others like yourself go out there and say, well, I don't really believe we should be at war with Russia, and we should do everything we can to end the conflict in Ukraine, they use old Cold War terminology to attack, because they don't really want to argue, it seems, on the substance. And there's a lot of substance. They'd rather just use like the smear tactics of, like you said, the old McCarthy days. And what are you, in Putin's pocket? Or are you a Russian asset? Look at Tulsi Gabbard, what happened to her? She was able to transcend all of that, thankfully, because of the overriding politics. The Republicans did not want to go against Trump on this nomination. But I'm sure many of them, if they had their druthers, would have voted against her, because that she wasn't speaking their language on Russia, Ukraine. So it's not just a Democrat Republican thing. I think it's a war party thing. It's old Cold War thinking.
Yes, and I mean, some leaders, well, particularly he doesn't come to mind right now. His name doesn't come to my head. Said the quiet part out loud, which is that they really want to topple Putin, which is insane. All of the times that we've tried to topple leaders, and yes, Putin's terrible. Yes, he does a lot of terrible things, but what are we going to replace him with? We never have a plan, and it always ends up worse. Look at how we've left the Middle East. It's in shambles, and there are a lot of really rough leaders out there, but we shouldn't be the policemen of the world. And when we are, we're distracted from focusing on problems at home as well, I think.
Yeah. And time and again has proven that our regime change policies have often put more threatening people in charge, or have led to more destabilized situations in those countries. And you would think that we would have learned from that, like what happened after the Ukraine, the Maidan revolution, what happened in Libya, and go down the line. We have pushed for regime change. We have meddled in other people's elections and affairs, and oftentimes they get worse governments in place that then we have to go back and try to fix, even though we should just stay out of it. So on the issue of Russia, there are plenty of people here who would like to see Putin go, but all the experts that I talk to say what you're going to get in his place is probably a more hardline character who is less even less westernized or less amenable to working with Western capitals than even Putin. So, I don't think that there is a urge among the American people to topple Putin. I think all that talk is emanating from those people I just described in Washington who can't get out of the Cold War mindset. But those people are relatively powerful and influential enough to be on the boards of, think tanks, consulting groups, editorial mastheads. So they do have some influence. I'm thinking people like Victoria Nuland or Ann Applebaum at the Atlantic Council, Elliot Cohen at the Atlantic Council. So they have an outsized influence on the discourse, but I do think that they are a minority and they are a dying breed. I think that's why the election of Donald Trump in this regard is so important, because he doesn't truck with those people. He doesn't like them. They don't like him. He's not in their club and he doesn't want to be in their club. And he says things that just blow their minds. And that's including, I'm going to talk to Putin. I'm going to call him on the phone and we're going to meet. And maybe we're going to meet in Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman hosting. I mean, this just sends heads exploding all over Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the whole policy of not talking to our enemies never made sense to me, because you have to. That's what diplomacy is all about. Otherwise, and from what I understand, Biden didn't talk to Putin at all during at least during this presidency, and which is insane. You have to negotiate. You always have to negotiate one way or another. Yes, negotiate from a position of strength, but negotiate, and find out what they want, find out where you can come to a meeting of the minds. Otherwise, I mean, look at the destruction that's happened in Ukraine, and a whole generation of people has basically been lost. Now I think the average age of the soldier is like 41, 42. And they were dragging people off the streets, and I've seen pictures and videos of guys my age in like poorly fitting outfits that clearly weren't trained, and they're just sitting there because they know they're just cannon fodder. They're just waiting to be slaughtered, which is terrible. Trump has also said some wild things, like he does, like he wants to turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Mediterranean, which is insane.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I'm very disappointed. I don't know what to believe. And I'm just kind of in a wait and see mode. I think, as an editor, I had cautioned about this all throughout the last year, that Trump was being very cagey about what his position was on the Gaza-Israel war. So when he was asked during the debates, he would say things like, oh, it's just so awful what's going on there. The killing's got to stop. They just need to finish it. Well, what does that mean? Nobody knew. And by the end of the campaign, he had correctly sussed out that he needed to talk about peace, and he needed to criticize the Biden policy in Gaza, and he needed to reach out to the Arab community and promise them that the war would end. And that helped him, because the Arab American community was so angry with the Biden administration that they just did not turn out to vote. And we can see it in the election totals that he lost, or that Kamala Harris lost big time in those precincts. But then when all the dust settles, we realize we still don't know what he meant about like bringing peace to the Middle East. And we kind of got a little glimpse of that over the last week, where he says he wants to clear out Gaza, rebuild it, and not rebuild it for Palestinians, but rebuild it for everybody in the Middle East. Those are sending alarm bells everywhere, because, as you know, historically, Palestinians have been driven systematically from their lands from 1948 on, and they have not been allowed back. And there's a big debate over right of return. And what he's asking is for yet another mass exodus without the possible right of return. His administration has been sending mixed signals on that question. He says this is for everybody in the Middle East. When asked about it, about whether Palestinians would be able to return, he says something to the effect of they wouldn't really want to because we're going to just build them these beautiful places elsewhere. And then his administration backpedals a little bit the next day saying, oh yeah, no, this is just temporary. And then Trump 2 days later says, no, they're not going to come back. So what is going on? Some people who want to be generous, who want to hope that Trump isn't calling for a complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza, say, oh, well, this is sort of a gambit to put Israel on notice that if the United States engineers a sort of takeover of Gaza and helps rebuild it with the help of these Arab countries, that somehow Israel will have no control over it, that it would be a completely US driven enterprise. I find so many holes in that, I wouldn't even know where to start because I don't know where we would have the authority to lead the takeover of Gaza, even if we could find a way to like get all these Arab countries to engage in the reconstruction. How do you do that with the Palestinians there who clearly don't want to leave? The security situation is another issue. And then, these Arab leaders, I don't know if they are fully committed. They're definitely not committed to taking any Palestinians. The Egyptians and Jordanians those governments could collapse if millions of Palestinians flood into their country. So there's so many holes in this whole thing that I don't know if he's just testing the water, if this is some sort of 3D chess game going on. I don't know. But it's really difficult for me because I know that a number of people on his staff in the picks and appointments that he's made are very pro-Israel, Zionist, in fact, that it's hard for me to believe that he isn't doing this to benefit Israel in some way. And that makes me very nervous because I think Netanyahu would really love to restart the war in Gaza or have a takeover of Gaza completely, like they seem to be doing in the West Bank.
Yeah, there are a lot of theories about October 7th. And I mean, of course, it was terrible what happened, but a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but there are people that believe that it was something that Israel colluded on, that basically it was an excuse to flatten Gaza. Basically, because this is the most watched border in the world. And somehow they were able to just crash through. The music festival was moved at the last minute from the north to the south. And then it took over 8 hours for any response to come. In the meantime, it was just a slaughter. It was just, raping and pillaging, literally. It seems like that couldn't happen without some knowledge on both sides about it. And a lot of people think, that it was kind of like the motive for Ukraine to a certain extent, which was really about pipelines, about gas and other resources going through, or maybe a luxury resort. I mean, that wasn't what was in their head clearly in Gaza, but
Yeah.
But taking that land for another use, and you can't really do that without pushing all the people off of it, and you can't really do that without being given some excuse.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are a lot of theories out there about what happened on that day, and we know that more Israelis were killed by their own Israeli forces that they care to acknowledge. That's come out in a lot of reporting. So the actual number of people that Hamas has killed, like civilians, is much lower than originally reported. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu bragged and boasted about keeping Hamas afloat and even supporting them as a way to wedge with the Palestinian Authority. So in many ways, he's responsible for the strength and the maintenance of that militant group for
Mhm.
years. We also have seen reporting of scouts and people at outposts in Israel that day, mostly manned by women, women who are in charge of these outposts, Israeli soldiers, had warned that they had heard transmissions about this attack and were ignored. That's all been reported in mainstream by Washington Post and New York Times, so it's nothing that I'm just sort of passing along as fake news. It's, very well documented that there are so many holes in the story and so many different threads. Also, some of the hostages have been killed by Israeli airstrikes, and some of in the fumes and toxicity that had been sent down into the tunnels as a result. So there's just so much we don't know. And guess what? As long as Israel is in conflict in Gaza and the West Bank, and Netanyahu clings to power, he is not going to be held accountable for all the things that we just mentioned, and also for just any security lapses writ large that led to October 7th. And so it's in his best interest to keep things the way they are, which is fighting and destroying. And we're, this ceasefire, we're only in the first phase. The second phase would involve like a full withdrawal from Gaza, and we're not sure that's going to happen. They're still negotiating that. So I don't know, Joe. It seems to me that there are enough interests in the Israeli government on the hard right that want to see this conflict continue, but also ultimately want to drive the Palestinians out of Gaza and the West Bank. And so yes, they benefit from all of this, and including October 7th.
Yeah, it seems clear that they're putting most of the pressure on the Palestinians. I believe, well, I mean, Trump even said, if the rest of the hostages aren't released, hell will break loose or something to that effect. And then also the leaders of Hamas who were living, I believe, in Qatar, was it? Or they've been evicted from their luxury apartments and everything. Which is crazy that they were living like that when the rest of their people are literally starving to death, among other things. So all the pressure is really being put on them, and I think we have so much intelligence around the world that it seems like so much of this we kind of let happen because it keeps the game going. It's like okay, my enemy ran out of rocks to throw at me, so I'm going to go dump a bunch more rocks at his house so he can throw another rock at me tomorrow, and we can keep this argument going forever. But on another end, I mean, I remember last year there was a lot of tension between us and China about Taiwan. It seems like that's completely subsided. It's out of the news altogether. Fairly, I haven't really heard anything more about it, and it seems like basically we're not going to do anything about it if China takes over Taiwan again. It seems like we've kind of allowed that to move forward, and much like parts of Ukraine, Taiwan to many people is considered to be part of China and was always part of China. So it's
it's interesting. I read a story, I think, I don't want to say where it was. It was either the Washington Post or the New York Times, but they were saying that the leadership Taiwan is a little nervous because they can't really determine where Trump is going to be on this issue. They felt like when he was elected the first time, he was much more effusive in his support for Taiwan against China. And their president at the time was one of the first foreign leaders that he spoke with. This time it's like radio silence from the Trump administration. And it seems that Trump's team is more interested in finding ways to get closer to China, or at least engage in a competitive dance with China that they could get something out of. And so they're more focused on the trade issues. As you probably have noted, that they didn't get hit with the same kind of tariffs and the high tariffs that Trump was threatening Canada and Mexico with. He was threatening them with 25% tariffs. China was like 10%, and they were like, phew, we thought he was going to really kill us. And they were like, yeah, we can deal with that. And, they came back with their retaliatory regime of their own. And there seems to be this little dance going on, but neither side seems particularly angry or escalatory. And that's making Taiwan a little nervous because up until now, Biden had been very full-throated and made a couple gaffes in his time, saying that the United States would militarily defend Taiwan if attacked by China, which is a big no-no in terms of us adhering to long-term policy where they engage in this strategic ambiguity. Like, we support Taiwan, but we're not going to go out and say we're going to go to war for them. So we can maintain sort of diplomatic ties with China. We recognize that Taiwan is considered part of China by the Chinese government, but at the same time, we want a peaceful resolution of that unification issue. So everything is delicate and in the diplomacy, and Biden kind of blew that up a little. And a lot of people in Washington were supporting that. They think that we should be very face forward about our defense of Taiwan. We should, give them all of these weapons. We should give them advanced weaponry. We should be doing military exercises. We should be doing these freedom of navigation sailings through the Taiwan Strait on their behalf. I personally, and Quincy, who I work for, think that's kind of escalatory, that it actually is going to make things worse. I think because Trump is who he is, he's more interested in the trade issue. He's been very skeptical of Taiwan, of China, but he has never seemed ideologically driven to protecting Taiwan or ideologically driven to oppose the Chinese communist government there. So I think there's a lot of question marks on whether that's going to be a major issue like it was Biden administration and his first administration too. Trump was very sort of focused on, the trade war and acting tough, but I'm just not getting that vibe from him this time.
Yeah, he definitely is keeping a lot of his promises, at least so far, in terms of things that he said and that he's doing. Well, not so much, of course, with the Palestinians, clearly, but he's cutting so much with Doge, and I think that the cuts in Doge, at least some of them, like USAID, there have been a lot of reports that actually they were funding regime changes and through the CIA, and they also were funding news outlets throughout the world, which are supposedly independent. So that's kind of that's not kind of, it's very concerning.
Yeah.
And then they're constantly telling us about misinformation and disinformation while they're paying everybody.
That's right. Kind of hypocritical. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think if nothing else, he knows that war is bad for business, and he is a businessman and he wants to bring business back to the United States. I don't know if the tariffs are going to bring factories back. It seems like that's almost a war that we lost back in the 70s and 80s, because we can't compete, but the dollar is going lower and lower. And, I think we need to figure out what's going to happen with that. I know that he's kind of embracing cryptocurrency some.
Yeah.
And I don't know, crypto. It's funny when Trump was elected, the markets, the stock market as well, but also crypto went through the roof. And then lately it's been a lot more volatile. And they say that's because of the tariffs and because of the uncertainty. And there is going to be uncertainty. I saw an economist recently saying that which is why Trump is working at a massive speed. Whatever Trump does to change the economy and to change the world, he has to do it now, because we're still in a Biden economy. But 2 years from now, it's going to be a Trump economy. He's going to own it, and it'll be too late to do anything at that point. And it's also the midterms, when traditionally power
Oh my
shifts.
goodness. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because I can already hear people on like the C-SPAN when they have like the call in on the Washington Journal and other, commentary, that I'm picking up in the ether. They're already trying to blame Trump for like the high prices at the gas pump and the grocery store, and he's only been president for a month. So you can imagine over the next 2 years, I mean, if prices don't go down for whatever reason, like I've heard that he was getting blamed for the egg shortage, and that's because of avian flu. But it's the cost of eggs. I mean, at my store in Arlington, Virginia, they were $7 for a dozen of eggs, but people are trying to blame Trump for that. So I think we're in for, unfortunately, this sort of news cycle, or not news cycle, the election cycle for the midterms has already begun. And they're going to and you're absolutely right. If we do not see a turnaround in the economy, or if things take a dive, and they could because of things that Trump is doing. I'm not an economist, so I don't watch the markets. I have experts here that I try to tap into their knowledge. But yeah, if things go sour because of the policies that he's instituting today on the tariffs and whatnot, there will be a snapback against him, and I think he's aware of that. Of all the things that could motivate him, I think losing the admiration and the support from his base in the American public is probably the biggest. And if he can't deliver on the economy, that's going to be, yeah, it'll be a reckoning. And I'm sure he does not want to deal with it. The same would go for putting American troops in harm's way. He mentioned that American troops might be responsible for carrying out this crazy plan he has in Gaza. And a lot of people on the right were like, no, this is not what I voted for. I did not vote to send men and women to foreign lands that hold no interest for the United States, no security interest. So I think that he probably knows that would be a no-go in terms of putting U.S. troops on the ground outside of, and I think that's why he's focused on the border and putting troops there. But he's only so far he can go with those threats, sending troops to Israel or any other place.
Yeah, and I mean, basically, I misspoke earlier. I was thinking of J.D. Vance speaking to the European Parliament. It was not Pete Hegseth, but I did see Pete Hegseth was out with troops doing push-ups and things in the freezing cold. And Kim Iverson talked about that, because she said, well, it's great that he's broing out with these guys, but basically his position is not supposed to be traditionally a military position. He's more about watching the budget and cutting the budget where it needs to be cut. But I think that it's still important that he does have a camaraderie with them, so that he knows that what he does affects them.
Right.
And we've had a deficit in military personnel. Now, I guess from what I understand, there's a surplus of people that are signing up for the military, young people, at least for the Army, to the point where they don't have the resources to take them in fast enough. And some people are being put on waiting lists, which is the first time in a long time.
I'd have to look into that. I think, in my experience of covering that issue, when the forces, that the individual forces aren't making their recruitment goals, they lower the goals. And then they make the goal, and then they go and they say, see, we don't have a recruitment problem. So I would personally have to look into that, because I remember it was just a year ago that all of the forces were not making goals. And there was what you would call a recruitment crisis. And it wasn't rooted in just one thing. Now, Pete Hegseth and many people on the right or the MAGA world would like to say the recruiting crisis is derived from the wokeness that has overtaken the institution. It has alienated people from wanting to join. Then the people on the left side of the dial will say, well, it's because nobody wants to go to war, and they have different options now. They can go to school, they can go to community college, they can learn a skill. They don't have to join the military to get out of their socioeconomic situation and then risk having to go die in some godforsaken war that nobody, that nobody can explain. I feel, and then then there's this other strand that feels that the military has gotten so corrupted and politicized that's also been an alienating factor that goes beyond the whole wokeness. And I think it's a combination of all those things and probably more. And it's going to be a long time before you fix it, because it's not just one thing or the other. So it would be hard for me to think that just because Trump won, that somehow everybody's gung-ho to join the military. The military has a lot of problems, and they're systematic and institutional, and it doesn't matter that, Trump likes them or Pete Hegseth is one of them, and that he's promised to take woke out. I think it's going to take a much longer reckoning than that. And I'm hoping at some point that'll happen, but it's hard for me to believe that these recruitment numbers have all of a sudden surged, that there isn't like a little story behind it. But you gave me something to look up to, so maybe I can write about
Yeah.
over the next week or two, and I'll get back to you.
It sounds good. I get these mental anecdotes that I pick up. I believe I heard that on KNX radio. But I take everything with a grain of salt, because like you said, numbers can be manipulated, and oftentimes they are, because for various reasons. And also, probably if the numbers were so far down, they discontinued some training locations because they weren't using them. So,
Right,
they have
exactly. We'd
up
have to
again.
take a look at that. But I believe you, because I think I saw something just on a headline to that effect, that recruitment was going up, and I made like a half a mental note, like, oh, I gotta check that out. So
Yeah. Now, Syria has changed hands. Assad is out. But I haven't really heard anything more since then. What's going on over there? Do you know any updates on that, or?
it's really difficult, Joe. I mean, the last time I really saw a well-reported piece on this in one of our mainstreams, like Washington Post or whatever, that have reporters there, was that the new the new government or controlling authority in Syria, the al-Shara, I forget his first name, and forgive me, the head of the
Who was on the
HTS.
terrorist list, by the way?
Yes, we'll just
Yeah.
call him al-Shara. So
Yeah.
al-Shara has said that so basically they're going to change the constitution. He is effectively in charge and officially in charge. We do not know when there will ever be elections. That has not been announced. He had said in the past that he was going to pull together like a council with that had representatives from all of the parties and minorities and groups there, to start the long process of elections and rewriting the Constitution. So it sounds like he's fully in charge. Not a big surprise there. I have heard little disparate reports about the Alawites there, which was the predominant minority group behind Bashar Assad's Ba'athist movement and his government, and there's been some retribution against Alawites there. I don't know a ton about that. It doesn't seem to be as widespread as people had cautioned against. But then again, it's really difficult because reporters are not focused. At least Western reporters are not super focused on Syria right now. So a lot of what's coming through is through social media. I know the Gray Zone has done a lot of reporting on that, and they believe, and they have reported, there have been more attacks on minorities there that's being widespreadly, that has been reported in any widespread way here. But I don't know. And another thread to this story is what's going on with the Kurds. They continue to be fighting with the Turks in the northeastern part of the country. Our troops continue to be there, US troops, that is. And we have about 2,000 troops. It's not clear whether Trump is going to take them out and withdraw them like he has said in the past. There was some reporting that by two Trump officials, unnamed, told NBC News, I believe, that Trump is going to withdraw troops from Syria, which is very good news because we really don't know why they're there in the first place. We want to conduct terrorist operations. We have plenty of bases in the Middle East in which we are launching airstrikes, which we have been. Why do we have these outposts with these soldiers and Marines still still serving as, I think, as sitting ducks in the region? I know they've conducted raids against ISIS targets, but really, it's been a long time since any authority has, or anybody with authority has explained what we're still doing there. And Trump seems to be of the mind that we don't need to. So that's a question. There's a question about whether Israel is going to be able to maintain what seems to be a growing foothold in the Golan Heights, in complete violation of UN peace treaty with Syria. So that's another question. Trump is not going to fight it because he was just bragging the other night how he recognized that Israel has control of the Golan Heights. So we're not going to get involved. So a lot of question marks, but as I said, I don't think the media is particularly focused on it. I think is the Trump administration going to help lift the sanctions on Syria so they could at least start rebuilding? I don't know. That's another question mark too.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that pop up in the news and then disappear, like the Houthis, who were kind of controlling the Red Sea, and I think it's the Red Sea, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and that was a concern, of course, to us, partly not just because of the security, but also because of world trade, because of the Suez Canal and access to the canal from various countries that need to go through, just like now we're dealing with the Panama Canal. These canals, we need them, and we also kind of feel like they're ours to a certain extent. But the southern hemisphere seems to always be ignored. Africa and Latin America, Africa more. There were a bunch of coups over the past year, Burkina Faso, Niger, and I know that Burkina Faso, a few months ago, I believe, kicked out all the French bases and the military there, and they seem to be allying with the Russians as well, and with the Chinese. I really don't know where that's going. It makes me crazy how this stuff pops up and then then it just disappears and you don't hear anything more about it. I do follow some African sites on X and that kind of thing just to try and keep track, but do you know anything that's going on over there or in Africa?
The French have been totally kicked out of the Sahel, and you mentioned Mali and Niger, Burkina Faso. And Niger has kicked us out. They are mostly run now by juntas. Now I'm going to get a lot of this mixed up, but I'm going to give you the broad view because I'm not an Africa expert. But go to Responsible Statecraft. We have a lot of smart people writing about this. But the broad view is that these countries have all undergone some sort of a transfer of government mostly coups being run by juntas, military juntas, who really don't like the West. They are very skeptical. They are very post-colonial. And in many cases, they have good reason. The ironic thing is that we help train a lot of these people with our counterinsurgency programs there. So we train these guys, and then they overthrow their elected governments. And some of these elected governments weren't that great either, but they overthrow the elected governments, they take over, and then they turn around and say, you know what, we don't want any more French, we don't want any more United States military. And in any other country and any other government that's sucking up to the West, we don't like you either. And so we had an interesting piece up about the junta in Niger accusing the leadership of Nigeria with working with the French to undermine Niger. And basically they are gaining a lot of an influence and power by standing up as the anti-Western forces in these regions. And they are capitalizing or exploiting maybe a lot of the anger in their populations and in harnessing that against the West, even though the problems that these countries are dealing with are a mix of, the post-colonial corruption and governance and oppression mixed in with a lot of crap from, the West as well. So there's a lot going on there, but they found that seems to be resonating with people, at least in these populations. So it's very interesting because you mentioned the Russians. The Russians are at the same time trying to get a foothold and fill this gap that's being left by these Western forces being expelled. And they're having their own challenges because we also had a story at Responsible Statecraft about the Wagner Group and how they had been coming in and providing security for a lot of these countries. And now that the Ukraine war has sucked up a lot of resources and the Wagner Group has been broken up after their own attempted mutiny, they are finding like that they can't do both. They can't field these mercenaries and then engage in these conflicts. And they lost a lot of influence in Syria as well. And so they're trying really hard. So you have this sort of great power conflict going on between Russia and the West, and then also China with their Belt and Road. And, what gets lost here is that there are people who are just suffering in these places. Like you look at what's happening in Sudan, and you have these warring forces. You have the government, which is a government as a result of coup, and then you have like the rebel like offshoot of that. And they're being funded by these middle powers like the UAE and Egypt, and they're just destroying the Sudan, and there's a famine going on, and people are just dying in droves, and it's always the people, that suffer, but yet these great powers are all like trying to get their piece, and the United States has just been really weak because for so long we've been in at the counterinsurgency game, like, oh, we'll provide security, we'll train your forces, and we should have just been more focused on diplomacy and bringing our A game to like help like stop these wars or help both sides negotiate. And we just don't have what it takes to really engage in real diplomacy. Now you could say, well, it's not very good, to cut off aid to these places like Trump is doing, through Doge and all of this soft power. But I'm not so sure that was necessarily working either. So I just feel like we lost a lot of our muscle memory for diplomacy and spend a lot of money on military solutions. And now those aren't working because we've been kicked out. And so what's left? And I don't know if the Trump administration is up to the task either. So
Yeah, well, it's a tall order, and it's really we've done so much damage in terms of our uh reputations around the world. Often there's so many different programs, social programs that we put into place in different countries through charity aid, and we would
yeah,
withhold the charity unless they were willing to say, okay, well, we're going to do this as well, like which was often something that had to do with our values and not necessarily their
right,
values.
right.
So yeah, that needs to end. But who knows? I mean, we're always going to be Americans. We're a little better than we were years ago. I was born in Europe to American parents, and so I always heard the American stereotypes on both sides of the ocean. And I would be embarrassed when I was a kid because I would see Americans go into a restaurant in Spain and be annoyed because they didn't have spaghetti or hamburgers, that kind of thing. But that's changed a lot, particularly when the economy had the boom around the turn of the century, as they say, around 2000 with the dot-com
Yeah,
boom. A lot
yep,
more Americans went to Europe, and then all of a sudden there were authentic Spanish and Italian restaurants rather than our version of it. So things
yeah,
have changed, but we're still very much ourselves, and we still have a sort of an isolated uh you know population. They say, I think, less than a third of the or less than 30% of the population has a passport even. So people don't necessarily leave, and everybody has an opinion about other places, but without going to them or even talking to people from those countries. But we're coming up on an hour. I want to thank you so much. You've been so wonderful every time, and I definitely want you to come back. And I
yeah.
always do it off my dome, as they say, rather than everybody asks me, well, what are your list of notes? I don't have a list of notes or questions. It's just based on what's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
But you're wonderful at doing that with off the fly.
Well, I appreciate it. It's mostly because of my work,
Yeah,
because I'm editing and publishing other people's, fantastic reporting and their research, and they are the experts. And obviously, I'm a super consumer of like politics and news and foreign policy. So, yeah, so I can riff off and talk about these different areas, but I mean, I have to say it's a great job that I have because I get to learn and I don't know, imbibe all of these things. And there's just so much going on, Joe. I mean, it's crazy. Like you could only focus on Africa and every day have another story. And it's not just because of the size of the continent. There are wars. I mean, what's going on in the Congo right now with the DRC. I don't know a ton about that, but again, we had a great piece about that. That's another heartbreaker of a story with, again, involving Rwanda and just a lot of people being caught in the crosshairs. But I mean, I most of my time over the last year has been consumed with Israel and Gaza and Ukraine, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I'm just hoping that the mainstream news doesn't leave Palestine and that story behind because as much as we've been focused on Trump and what he's saying in the Riviera of the Middle East, they're still not getting the aid there that they should be. And that was part of the ceasefire. So the mainstream media says, well, Hamas says it's not going to give the hostages back. Well, the reason why they said that was because Israel had been killing people in Gaza, but also that they haven't supplied the aid and the tents that they said they would in the first phase. And I believe that after watching that aid issue for a year and a half, like those, you can't say that they're not deliberately being starved or not being given sufficient services like healthcare and food and shelter because they're not. And Israel could easily get all that stuff in there, and they're not. And I think that's getting lost in the story.
yeah, for sure. It's a tragedy. I lived in Israel for a year from 84 to 85, and I grew up with Arab friends as well. It's gotten worse instead of getting better, sadly.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much. And where can everybody find you if they want to read your resources, your various publications?
Absolutely. So responsiblestatecraft.org. Every day we are publishing news stories, not just opinion, but reporting. We got some great writers, and I'm also hosting my own podcast called Trip the Beltway Fantastic. My sign back there. That usually comes out on Fridays. And yeah, and check out the Quincy Institute as well. That's our parent organization for our magazine. And we're just firing on all cylinders these days with all these issues. And I work with a lot of fantastic people really dedicated to peace, and finding a different way to engage in foreign policy that doesn't involve bombs and threats and troops all over the world.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, thanks again. And thanks to all our listeners. And until next time.